Thank you. Good evening, students. Welcome to a Sunday session on Board of Studies on GST. So, on a Sunday, if you have come, it means even last Sunday we've seen a lot of good attendance. Hope to see the same attendance today as well. Last week was an important topic. This week also it's an important topic, but it is not a very heavy topic. It is a very light topic, very easy to understand. Today we'll be discussing on time of supply. So with the heavy topic of exemptions, such a huge topic and so many exemptions, it was really heavy to grasp it. But time of supply is very simple and very easy to understand. With the graphical representations, I will make it that you remember the concepts by your own, by this presentations itself. So I would say time of supply and place of supply, time of supply and value of supply, which we are going to discuss today and tomorrow, will make it in a way that the presentations itself will be helpful for your examinations, because there's not much of a conceptual things or things like that. We just need to understand few basic things. Once we understand the basics, we are good to go with it. And most of these topics we have already discussed while talking about other topics as well. So we know that most of these concepts are known concepts. They are not new concepts for us. Okay, can we start? I think, yes, we are good to go with all the people. Okay, so time of supply, what we will discuss today is basically two things. Today we'll discuss time of supply, and tomorrow we'll discuss on value of supply. Time of supply has two things. Even though GST is on goods and service, but the time for goods and time of supply for services is different, because the nature of those things itself, goods is different and service is different. That's why the time of supply of goods is different, time of supply of services is different. Even though GST is levied on both, but when you supply goods, when you supply service, the principles for determining these two are separate. So we will understand what is the time of supply for goods and what is the time of supply for services. Within the goods itself, you'll have forward charge, which is the regular charging mechanism, reverse charge, the reverse charge mechanism, which we have understood in depth. Then vouchers. Okay, there are special kind of transactions apart from forward charge and reverse charge, which will help us to understand what is their time of supply. So one of them is vouchers. Another one is goods which are sold on returnable basis. Vouchers could be for goods as well as for services. It could be for both. So we'll understand for goods, what is the time of supply for these vouchers, and for services, what is the time of supply for these vouchers. And then residual cases, saying that if it is not covered under any above clauses, then you cannot say that there is no time of supply defined. Then it becomes out of GST, because like we are defined that there are four canons of taxation, right? One of them is determining when is the time, what is the time when GST is payable, right? So what is that time when GST is payable? To determine that, this chapter is important. So it shouldn't be challenged at a higher forum saying that no, the time of supply for my transaction is not defined, so it is out of the purview of GST because it is not clearly defined. To get away with it, कि ऐसा chances नहीं होना चाहिए कि मेरा transaction के लिए time of supply define नहीं हुआ है. That's not possible. That's why the residual cases, the residual clause in this sections of the time of supply will cover residual clauses, saying that if there is no, if your transaction is in such a manner that it doesn't fit in any of these clauses above, then the residual clause will come to a rescue, saying that this clause will tax your transaction. ठीक है? So रेसिडुअल क्लॉज क्या बताएगा? ये बताएगा कि आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई, जब आपके फॉरवर्ड चार्ज रिवर्स चार्ज के कंडीशंस है, उनके सेक्शंस है और वो कंप्लाई नहीं हो रहे, या आपका ट्रांजैक्शंस उस सेक्शन में डिफाइन नहीं हो रहा है, तो रेसिडुअल क्लॉज में आपके ट्रांजैक्शंस कवर अप हो जाएंगे. तो टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई कवर्स all kinds of transactions. Then when is GST payable? When is the GST payable on Goods on GST is payable on supply of goods or services. This we have understood very clearly from section 7 that GST is definitely payable on supply of goods or services. Now, supply could consist of various elements. Take a practical transaction saying that when does a transaction trigger? What are all the pointers which will get attracted for a transaction to get completed? Before GST, the business transaction we'll have to look into because business will have various transactions and we will have to cover up those transactions and then see when is GST payable on that. Okay. So a supply, when you do any supply, you'll not directly sell, raise an invoice. There are a lot of things before and after also. Somebody has to make an inquiry. Once they make an inquiry saying that they need a particular brand of goods, then a purchase order has been placed, right? So you make like in the contract act, you would have understood, you make a offer. A offer when accepted becomes a promise, right? So to materialize that promise, there will be a purchase order which the purchaser will give it to the seller. Because the seller, if he has to sell something, the agreement or the purchase order should define what is the price you are selling at. Orally I can tell something, that is also possible, or a actual verbal document of purchase order may come in case of bigger companies. So you could get a purchase order, then you can dispatch the goods. Okay, you'll dispatch and starts from when your goods are taken out from the factory, then it will be delivered at the customer's premises if the agreement is such that the goods has to be delivered. So dispatch and delivery is the very interlinked transaction, but dispatch starts when the goods are coming out of your factory, and then delivery of the goods happen and the goods are actually delivered. In case of service, it would be actual performance of service, then entry in the records, then raising an invoice, then the payment and entry of payment in the books. So there are so many transactions in any supply. So we'll have to understand what point of time does GST become payable. At which given point of time does GST become payable? That's the reason the section, this section 12 provides the time of supply. Okay, to understand this better, just take the next slide. At what point of time GST becomes payable? Does it become payable when an agreement to supply of goods or services made? Does it apply when the goods are shipped? Does it apply when the invoice is issued or when the payment is made or when? Okay, the time of supply provides answer to these questions. So there are various pointers in a transaction. Time of supply will tell, yes, this X is a pointer. What is that X? We will understand in today's class. Say, suppose that example is from various pointers, the time of supply says 11th April. Might be that is the date when the payment is received. So the supplies, the time of supply section says this is the point when the time of supply triggered. 11th April in one of these cases, say it is payment of tax. So if the payment of tax is 11th of April, should we pay tax immediately on 11th of April itself? How does the payment work then? So as soon as I supply, time of supply is triggered. If time of supply is triggered, should I make the payment on that day? Vaishali, Del Credar agent, we will come to that once we come to that respective topic or at the end of the next session. Please remind me tomorrow. Then I'll clarify your doubt on Del Credar agent. When received, maybe later after end of the month. What are the opinion of other students? Mayur, from this chapter, you can either get a direct question or you could get an indirect question where a transaction is being given and you will have to determine the time of supply and the value of supply. So it could be a combination of other chapters as well. Good evening, Balerao. Hmm. Okay, so most of you are trying to give me an answer saying that when the invoice is issued, date on which payment is recorded. So those are the things which we will come into the section. So in your case, Keshav, if you're saying that when the invoice is issued, I've issued the invoice now. Suppose you are saying time of supply is issue of invoice. My question is, if you have determined the time of supply to be the date of invoice, so will you pay the GST today itself because time of supply is that? So if you have issued invoice today, then you will pay the taxes in today. If you have raised another invoice tomorrow, then you will go and pay the taxes tomorrow. So for every transaction, will you do like that? Or Jyoti, you're saying date on which payment is received. So today, whatever payments you have received, total of that GST, will you pay that payment today itself? Will it be that every time of supply, once it triggers, will you pay the taxes on that day? Or when is it paid? Few people have given a correct answer. I'm just expecting answers from others. What is your thought process? Okay. Few of them have now understood my question that the taxes will not be paid as and when the time of supply is triggered on a particular date. It will be triggered at the month end. Okay. So the month end. So all such transactions where the time of supply is considered, all such transactions will be bundled together on a periodic basis. So there are two periods possible in GST, monthly and quarterly payments. So if a monthly taxpayer is there, say his time of supply is 11th April. So all the transactions for the month of April, he will accumulate and he will make the payment. Okay, so the due date of April of all the transactions in April, which time of supply is triggered, the payment will happen on the 20th of May. So the government says that don't come and pay taxes on each and every transaction. Accumulate all those type of transactions for a period. If you're a monthly filer, then you accumulate all your transactions for a month and pay the taxes by the 20th. For quarterly payers, also the return has to be filed on a quarterly, but payment also is happening on a monthly basis. So for them also, you will accumulate or you will consolidate all the transactions for the month and pay the taxes. Okay. So that's how time of supply is linked to the payment of supply, payment of tax. You will accumulate all the transactions for the time of supply for a month, add all those transactions, and then pay the taxes. Yeah. Now, before getting into the time of supply, some important definitions are relevant to understand what is goods. Okay, what is goods, what is service? Basics, yes, basics, but still we need to understand this because that itself will differentiate. If it is goods, then the time of supply for goods is separate, and if it is services, the time of supply for services is different. Goods is defined as goods means any all kind of movable property. Okay, all kinds of movable property, and it includes actionable claim, growing crops, grass, and things forming part of the land agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply. Okay. Firstly, all immovable property is out of goods. So immovable property is not goods. Land, building, any kind of immovable property is not goods. Goods means all kind of movable property, and it includes actionable claims, growing crops, grass, and things forming part of the land agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply, and it excludes money and securities. Okay, excludes money and securities. So money is a movable property, but still it is outside goods because money is only a tender to buy some goods and things like that. And securities also, when you securities means shares, bonds, debentures. Okay, all of that is security. So all the securities is not actually goods. You're buying, investing in security, you're getting equity out of it. So all kinds of securities and money is not goods. Okay, so this is the definition of goods. Now, what it includes specifically, it says actionable claim. What is actionable claim? Means I have a right to claim something. Is the actionable claim. One of the examples for actionable claim is you have bought a lottery ticket. Okay, earlier lottery tickets were very famous. Now it is all online tickets. But say physical or any, let for ease of understanding, you had a physical lottery ticket. Now hundreds of people have bought it. Now it is only a ticket, but once your number strikes that the lucky winner is your ticket, then with that ticket you can go and claim your prize. So you have a actionable claim against the lottery company to get the money. So this is called as actionable claim, wherein you have a right to claim something from the other person is called as an actionable claim. Okay, there are various scenarios of actionable claims, like if you sell some goods, the customer has to pay you, right? So that also is because you have an actionable claim against your debtor. So actionable claim is a claim against something. Then growing crops, grass, and things forming part of the land. So it is all one word. Growing crops, the grass, and things forming part of the land agreed to be severed before supply. Now, when you have sold a land, and you have sold the vegetables and the trees with the fruits which are growing on the land. Okay, now we know land is an immobile property outside the transaction of goods. But when this land is sold as a part of a transaction, as a growing crops, grass, and things farming part of the land, which is agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply. So before selling this, if you have agreed for the price of these fruits and vegetables, then it cannot escape GST saying that no, this is an immobile property, because the transaction was not only of immobile. So when you're selling land as such and something is growing naturally after some point of period of time, then it's a immobile property itself, no GST on that. But when you made a transaction of immobile property, आपने एक land बेचा है, and you had agreed that before that itself that the value is assigned to the fruits which it grows, and it is substantially the value what of the fruit, not necessary value, because here it doesn't say, it just says any growing crops, the grass and things forming part of the land which is agreed to be severed before supply, wherein you had agreed to sever it, matlab sever matlab cut it, then it will become goods, not otherwise. Grass and crops after cutting also it is good, but if you have agreed to be severed before supply. How can we find the date 20th May? In payment of tax, we'll see that the date is there. So of transactions of this month gets added up and paid in the subsequent month. Very good question, Bhavika. On 20th May, GST is paid up to 30th April or 20th May. So it is up to 30th April. Transactions for 1 month is getting paid by 20th May. For 1st May to 20th May, it is 1st May to 30th May, 20th May, then 10 days. So for the month of May, it will get paid in the 20th of June. So that's how the cycle works. Yeah, Nagraju. So as per Sale of Goods Act, actionable claim is not a sale, but here in GST is considered as a supply. Correct. So in case of sale of goods, they've specifically said actionable claim is not a sale. But here they're not saying whether it's a sale or supply. And we are not saying that on actionable claim you have to pay GST. We are saying actionable claim is considered as goods. And then if you read the whole GST Act, you have Schedule 3, which says what is goods, what are those transactions on which GST is not payable. In that, actionable claim is excluded to make sure that on the right to claim from debtors, right to claim from lottery tickets, GST is not payable, but specific kind of actionable claims, lottery, on lottery, betting, gambling, and online gamings. They wanted to include GST. That's why from the GST Schedule 3 also they've excluded. Okay, so from when you get your claim from your debtors, you don't have to pay GST. But lottery, betting, and gambling, they wanted to include. Though from the Schedule 3, they've said all actionable claims are excluded except these 3-4 transactions. Okay. Goods means every kind of Jaspreet. Goods means every kind of movable property other than money and securities, but includes actionable claims, growing crops, grass, and things attached to or forming part of the land agreed to be severed. Right. Why the time of supply is important? Like I said, there are 3 to 4 pointers which will come in a transaction. Now, Ninchi, you have agreed to sell your goods to me. Now I said, okay, to sell the goods, you have need some advance. I've paid you advance. So I've paid advance this month. Now you have sold next month. Okay. And invoice you have raised in the third month. So when is it tax payable? Today, first month, second month, or third month? To levy, to bring that solution wherein transaction is getting split in 3 months, and I have made the payment in this month, you have supplied next year, and invoice you have raised in the third month. So there are 3 events. So time of supply will tell you which of this event you have to capture and pay the tax. That's where time of supply is relevant. Debtors are actionable claim. Yes, they are. Okay, grass and crops after cutting. So if it is cut, then of course it is movable property. It will be good. What is the meaning of before supply? Wherein if it is a transaction of a immovable property, before the supply of such immovable property, if it is agreed, then it is called. So in this context, the supply, they say agreed to be severed before supply. Here the supply doesn't mean supply under section 7. That's a general supply what they've used here, that before selling or transferring the immovable property. Yeah, if the land is sold with crops and without severing, without agreeing to sever, severing will happen because some point of time it will happen. But if it is not agreed before supply, it could happen in cases where the value of those growing crops is negligible. Then it will not be considered as good. ग्रोइंग क्रॉप्स हिंदी में बता दीजिए, अगर जब कुछ पेड़ों से फल उग रहे हैं और आपने अग्रीमेंट किया है कि आपको ये फल चाहिए लेकिन आपको लैंड भी खरीदना, तो आप लैंड खरीद रहे हो और फल के साथ, क्योंकि सपोज एक एप्पल का ऑर्चर्ड है, एप्पल के प्राइसेस इतने रहते हैं कि आपने एप्पल के लिए खरीदा है उस जगह को, तो क्या हो जाएगा, आप एप्पल का भी वैल्यू असाइन करोगे, क्योंकि अगर जब आप ट्रांजैक्शन में डील करोगे आपका वैल्यू लैंड के ऊपर है, और लैंड तो ऊपर है ही है, जो खेती है खेती के ऊपर है, लेकिन जो क्रॉप्स ग्रोइंग स्टेज में है, अगर वो भी आप अग्री कर ले तो कि मैं इसको भी बाई करूंगा, तो फिर आप एप्पल का भी गुड्स में ले रहे हो, करेक्ट, आपका वैल्यू में आप कंसिडर कर रहे हो, तब उस एप्पल का भी प्राइसेस आपको इंक्लूड करना चाहिए एज ओ, अगर आप उसको वैल्यू अलग से मूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी में खरीद नहीं लोगे तो फिर पूरा वैल्यू इमूवेबल में चला जाएगा। सो दैट्स नॉट द इंटेंशन। वो जो सेब उग रहे हैं आपके एप्पल और खेत में, उसका भी वैल्यू अलग से गुड्स में आइडेंटिफाई करना चाहिए। हालांकि ये बात है कि एप्पल के ऊपर आपको जीएसटी नहीं लगेगा क्योंकि इट इज अ एग्जेम्प्टेड गुड्स, बट लेकिन उसे गुड्स तो मानना चाहिए। Agriculture produce is exempt. So that's because of an exemption. Agar exemption notification nahi hota, if there is no exemption notification, then it would have been taxable. So the GST is not envisaging that exemption is there. So I will not consider. First is the principle should be clear. So that's why they're making the principles clear and then they're giving the exemption notification. So today also on growing crops, you will not pay because crops are all exempted. But from that exemption perspective, it is exempt. Business in which inventory is immovable, like real estate, then the provisions of time of supply would be applicable. In a business where inventory is immovable, then it is not a goods, right? On such immovable property, GST would not be applicable. Now let's move to the definition of services. Services is also similarly defined with some exclusions. Services means anything other than goods. So goods means what is being defined. Now services, when they're defining, services means anything other than goods. So what is not goods becomes services. Okay. Services means anything other than goods because services is such wide thing that it is very difficult to define precisely what is a service. So that's why services have been defined as services means anything other than goods. And it also excludes money and securities. So two things are getting cleared here. Money and securities are excluded from goods and excluded from services, both the places. Money can neither be charged for GST either for as goods or services, and securities also cannot get charged as goods and services. That is first point. Second point is goods is defined, services is defined as an exclusion to exclude anything other than goods. So whatever transactions you do, it will all get covered under services, and it specifically includes two things. Like since they have said money is excluded, but the activities relating to use of money or its conversion for a consideration. Activities relating to use of money, wherein I am doing an activity, I'm getting money, that activity will be taxable. Now I am doing a supply of goods. I am selling mobiles. In exchange of that, I am getting money. So the activity is getting taxed. Doesn't mean that if money is excluded, the exchange of money for something that also will get excluded. So they made it amply clear that the activity relating to use of money or its conversion, which means money is getting converted into something. Money is getting converted into foreign exchange. I want to buy dollars. I'm giving money. I'm getting dollars. So there also is a conversion of money, but the transaction charges which is levied to convert this, that will be taxable. I'm going to the foreign exchange dealer, I'm giving him money and he's giving me foreign dollars. So that transaction is outside supply because it is still a money, but the activity of conversion is that how is that gauged, how is that valued through the conversion charges what the exchange agent charges, that is taxable. Doesn't mean that if money is exempted, anything on top of it you do is all excluded. Money is exempted, anything charged on top of money is only taxable. Then activities facilitating are, now again we said money के लिए the conversion for money is taxable. For securities, also same thing. Activities facilitating or arranging transaction in securities. Okay, if you have to buy any security from a broker, the broker will charge brokerage charges. That brokerage charges is an activity facilitating or arranging a transaction that is taxable. Okay, so the activities facilitating or arranging transactions in securities so that you can procure it, you can sell it, you can exchange it, you can transfer it. Those activities are taxable. If trees are grown for timber for the intention of selling, is it good? If trees are grown for timber, so the timber when it's grown is immovable property. Once the timber is severed and sold, then the timber becomes goods. What if there is any other thing in the land sale? I mean, any other thing is also sold which is leviable to GST, then what will happen? Anything could be saying that if there is a land, there is a building. Now, building is the one thing which could come other than those grass growing crops. For that, Schedule 3 says land and building there too, other than what is there in Schedule 2, which means if I'm selling a land and a building on it, then the building which is already constructed becomes an immobile property. But that doesn't mean that any construction of building is excluded in the GST, because at the time of construction, it is not yet an immobile property. It is in the process. So the building in the process of construction up to the date of occupancy certificate is a movable property. GST is levied on that. But the building after occupancy certificate becomes an immobile property. What is tender? Uh, in what context are you asking this, Anmol? Money includes bitcoins and any other thing. Yeah, so there's no clarity on this, but it is representing some kind of money worth itself. Bitcoin also would be a kind of money transaction. So because the value of that is it's not a goods, okay, it is still a kind of a currency. So it is not regulated currency. That's why you can't call it as a currency. Currency is one which is regulated by some central bank, but bitcoins are not regulated, but it acts like a transaction which can use as money. So that's why bitcoins also becomes a money itself. Intraday transactions, yeah, the base for intraday transaction is also securities. So that's why intraday transactions are also excluded from the definition of service in the context of money. I will just take the definition of money so that we can understand this clearly. Money means the Indian legal tender. That is the domination, the denomination which I give to tender something or to give something to another person to satisfy that transaction. That is the meaning of tender, which means what I give to the other person to complete the transaction. In a barter transaction, we know that for exchange of services, I would have paid something. I would have given something else because barter used to have that. I get something, I give something, the tender gets closed. In money, I give something so that the transaction is closed. That is the meaning of tender. Charges for opening Demat account, yes, that is also a transaction which is not money. So on charges for opening Demat is also chargeable. Next is the definition of recipient. Who is the recipient? If the consideration is payable for supply of goods or services, then the person who is liable to pay the consideration is the recipient. So for any transaction, if the consideration is payable, then the person who pays the consideration is the recipient. If there is no consideration payable, so it could be some transactions like in Schedule 1 transactions, you will see that a related party, if their consideration is not payable, their consideration is not payable, the person to whom goods are delivered or made available or to whom possession or use of the goods is given or made available becomes the recipient. Okay. In case of a branch transfer, in the case of a branch transfer, there is no there's no kind of a consideration which is obligatory because it gets adjusted in the books of accounts. I have to pay to the branch and branch has to pay me. So in that case, the person to whom these goods are delivered or the whom it is made available, because it could be that I'm delivering it, or it can become like we had discussed that an instance where the project is going on and the goods are already there. In case of a lease, the goods are already there, right? And that person has to whom these goods are made available or to whom possession is given, that person will become the recipient, where consideration has to be given the person who gives the consideration. In a transaction where consideration is not to be given, the person to whom such goods are delivered. And if no consideration is payable for supply of services, same thing. If no consideration is payable for supply of goods, then the person who it's delivered. And in a case of where consideration is not payable for the supply of services, then the person to whom the service is rendered becomes the recipient. Recipient can be the recipient himself, or it could include an agent acting on behalf of the recipient in relation to the goods or services supplied. Okay, so I could sell the goods to the person who is the recipient or his agent. Even if I make delivery to his agent, agent will not become the recipient. The principal on whose behalf I am delivering it to the agent becomes the recipient. That's why in case of a bill to ship to transactions, the person whom I'm shipping to will not become the recipients, because the principal, that is the person to whom I bill to, he will become the recipient. In composite supply, may if ancillary service or goods is exempt, then the service or goods is taxable in composite supply. In case of a composite supply, if the ancillary service is goods is exempt, then the what is the main supply, not the ancillary supply, the main service or supply, that will be taxable, and the composite also becomes taxable because the main component is getting taxable. All gets converted to taxable because it becomes a composite supply. Online payment is service or money. So money doesn't mean physical cash. Payment through bank also is a kind of money itself. So when I make payment through my bank, that is also treated as money. Bill to ship to has a specific provision, but recipient includes an agent that will also cover the transaction of bill to ship to. Lift is movable or immovable? Good question. So do you think lift is movable property or immovable property? What do you feel it is? Lift moves from ground floor to 15th floor also. Does it become movable, or you cannot move it from one building to another building? So does it become immovable? Immovable. Okay. If no consideration is payable for supply of goods. Any example for this kind of transactions? Yeah, wherein I give a dispose of goods. Okay, there is some old laptops I have disposed it off, for which I have not received consideration, right? Where consideration is not received, that could be a good example that I'm giving it to a NGO. They don't have to pay me anything, but still GST is payable on such transactions because GST says it is part of Schedule 1 where I buy any asset. So it's only in case of those assets on which I've claimed the input tax credit. So if I've claimed input tax credit on a capital goods and I dispose it off, on that also I have to pay GST. Okay, Jasprit, you're saying that it is immovable because it can move only into restricted areas. It can move from only one floor to another floor. So does it mean that we have to see the lift that it is immobile because it is fixed, but inside the lift is movable, right? You can move it from one floor to another floor. Is that the criteria? What will be your criteria for deciding mobile or immobile? After installation, it is movable. Correct. So after installation, it becomes immovable. It means that if it is kept as movable, okay, then the functioning will not work. The lift will fall from some floor. So to make it work in an efficient manner, it is made fixed through this civil work. But by the nature, immovable means that it cannot be moved at all. Say a building, a land, it cannot be moved at all. You have to demolish it itself. But in case of a lift, a lift when it is installed so that its functioning and movability is at its best. If you have to break it, then you can break the civil walls around it and you can dismantle it and use it elsewhere. Okay, there is no restriction that it cannot be moved. It has to get dismantled and assembled elsewhere. Once we do that, it is still usable. So lift, because of its usage, we cannot say that it is immobile. It is still a mobile property. Like you would have seen another example of big petrol tanks, okay, wherein you have to store large amounts of petrol which gets supplied for at airports. Do you think that is also immovable then? It is still not immovable, it becomes movable because just because everything can't move, it doesn't become immovable. Because of its nature, it is made fixed at a place, but it can move by dismantling and installing elsewhere. Things attached to the earth are permanently fastened to anything contained in the earth. Yes, but this fastening, why am I doing this? It's because of the functioning of it, not because of anything else. NGO में कौन देगा GST? Yeah. If I supply and if the NGO doesn't pay, then the supplier himself will have to pay. So GST doesn't say that if you have somebody to pay GST only, then will be liable to GST. Even if nobody is paying you, still you have to pay GST on that. Buildings can be moved from another place to techno. So those are all special types of buildings like a caravan and things. Otherwise, other buildings can't be moved. So it is still a immobile property. Okay, let's proceed further. We understood recipient. Now we'll move to the supplier. Who is the supplier? Supplier in relation to any goods or services or both shall mean the person who is supplying the said goods or services and also includes an agent. Like how for a recipient, agent includes, like that supplier also agent is included. So any agent selling on behalf of the principal, who is the supplier? The principal itself shall include an agent or acting on as such on behalf of such supplier in relation to the goods. Just 1 minute. Okay. So we're discussing the definition of supplier. Supplier in relation to any goods or services shall mean the person who is supplying the said goods or services and shall include an agent acting as such on behalf of such supplier in relation to the goods or services or both. This is defined in section 2, subsection 105. This you don't have to remember the section, but I've just mentioned here for our reference. So supplier in relation to any goods or services means the person who's supplying the goods or services and includes an agent acting on behalf of such supplier in relation to the goods or services. A simple definition. Is there, Mr. V, your question is there any difference if the third party is involved? Like in what instance? I didn't understand. Okay, Riya. All the three definitions एक बार हिंदी में समझाते हैं. Quickly, we'll have a recap. गुड्स क्या है? वो गुड्स वो है जो मूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी है. जो भी मूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी वो तो गुड्स है ही है. अब इसमें एक्शनेबल क्लेम भी इंक्लूडेड है और ग्रोइंग क्रॉप्स मतलब जो इसको तो हमने ठीक से समझ लिया कि एप्पल वगैरह जो भी क्रॉप्स ग्रास और थिंग्स फॉर्मिंग पार्ट ऑफ द लैंड है जिसको आपने अग्री कर दिया कि आप सिवर करोगे. सिवर मतलब कट करोगे. कब अग्री किया है? वो सप्लाई करने से पहले आपने अग्री कर दिया है तो फिर इंक्लूडेड. क्या एक्सक्लूडेड है? मनी और सिक्योरिटीज. मनी का मतलब सिर्फ मनी नहीं है. मनी इंक्लूड्स एनी लीगल टेंडर. मनी का डेफिनेशन किसी ने पूछ रहे थे तो उसका मनी का मीनिंग है मनी इंक्लूड्स एनी लीगल टेंडर और एनी फॉरेन करेंसी. चेक, प्रॉमिसरी नोट, ई पेमेंट जो भी करते जो भी आपका बैंक में आप ट्रांजैक्शन करते हैं वो भी मनी में ही इंक्लूडेड है. उसके अलावा लेटर ऑफ क्रेडिट, ड्राफ्ट, सब तरह के जो आप मनी को इधर इन कैश और इन बैंक जो आप कन्वर्ट करके इशू करते हो वो सब मनी में ही इंक्लूडेड है. ठीक है. तो मनी में मनी में ये सब इंक्लूडेड है. लेकिन क्या एक्सक्लूडेड है? मनी एंड सिक्योरिटीज. जो आप शेयर्स, स्टॉक्स, बॉन्ड्स, डिबेंचर्स परचेज करते हो सब एक्सक्लूडेड. दैट इज वो मीनिंग हो गया गुड्स का. सर्विसेज क्या बोलता है? सर्विसेज भी सब कुछ इंक्लूडेड है. सर्विस का डेफिनेशन बताया है. सर्विस मींस एनीथिंग एक्सक्लूडिंग द फॉलोइंग. सो फॉलोइंग चीजें नहीं है सर्विस में. गुड्स नहीं है. मतलब जो गुड्स के डेफिनेशन है वो तो है. सर्विस का मतलब जो भी गुड्स नहीं है वो सर्विसेज. और मनी और सिक्योरिटीज सर्विसेज नहीं है. और क्या इंक्लूडेड है? एक्टिविटीज रिलेटिंग टू कन्वर्जन ऑफ मनी. जब मनी को कन्वर्ट करते हो तो वो ट्रांजैक्शन इंक्लूडेड है. मनी को कैसे कन्वर्ट करते हो? मनी को डिमांड ड्राफ्ट में बनाते हो तो फिर डीडी चार्जेस लगाते हैं बैंक वाले, वो इंक्लूडेड है. इंडियन करेंसी को फॉरेन करेंसी में कन्वर्ट करते हो, ठीक है, वो सब इंक्लूडेड है. फिर एक्टिविटीज फैसिलिटिंग और ट्रांजैक्शन और अरेंजिंग और ट्रांजैक्शंस इन सिक्योरिटीज. आप सिक्योरिटीज को परचेज करने के लिए ब्रोकरेज चार्जेस देते हो, डीमैट अकाउंट ओपन करते हो, जो कुछ भी ट्रांजैक्शन आप सिक्योरिटीज के ऊपर वाले करते हो वो सब सर्विसेज में इंक्लूडेड है. नेक्स्ट, रिसिपिएंट. रिसिपिएंट कौन है? अगर आपको कंसिडरेशन पे करना है, आपने कुछ खरीदा है उसका आपको पेमेंट करना है, अगर आप पेमेंट करोगे तो फिर आप रिसिपिएंट बन जाओगे. लेकिन कुछ ट्रांजैक्शन जिसके लिए पेमेंट नहीं करना पड़ता है, जैसे ब्रांच ट्रांजैक्शंस, या फिर जैसे कोई आप एनजीओ को डोनेट करते हो, एनजीओ को पे करने की जरूरत नहीं है, करेक्ट. तो आप कुछ असेट दे देते हो एनजीओ को. सो उस केस में आप किसको डिलीवर करते हो वो रिसिपेंट बन जाएगा. और सर्विसेज के केसेस में आप जिसको सर्विस प्रोवाइड करते हो वो रिसिपेंट बन जाएगा. और रिसिपेंट का मतलब उसका एजेंट भी कहा जाएगा. जैसे आप एजेंट को सप्लाई करते हो तो रेसिपिएंट कौन रहेगा? प्रिंसिपल या एजेंट? प्रिंसिपल ही रहेगा क्योंकि प्रिंसिपल के बेसिस पे आप एजेंट को सप्लाई करते हो. तो रेसिपिएंट का डेफिनेशन वो है. सप्लायर का डेफिनेशन वो है कि सप्लाई इन रिलेशन टू गुड्स और सर्विसेज मींस द पर्सन सप्लाइंग. जो पर्सन सप्लाई करता है या जिसके कहने पे एजेंट सप्लाई करता है वो सप्लायर. सिंपल है ये डेफिनेशन. With relevance to the recipient, with relevance to the recipient, Will there be any explanation? Third party is involved. If the third party is involved, any person who's that will become an agent. So agent doesn't mean the agency relationship itself. So I have bought some goods and I'm telling that you don't supply it to me, supply it to third person. So that becomes the agent, and you are supplying to him on my instructions. So I will still become the recipient because on I am the one who have to pay the consideration. Understood, Mr. V? Agent issues bill on the principal's names. That's correct. Soma, very good interviewing question. Things forming part of the land. So is water considered as a goods? Water is considered as a natural resource, so it is not a goods, but specifically under the under the rate schedule, water is taxed at zero. It means any bottled water, because it's a bottled water, that will be taxable, but water as a natural usage is exempted, so that tomorrow this interpretation should not happen that water is a goods. So that's why water is exempted. But from that understanding, theoretically, we can say that water is a goods. Money may CC limit, debit card, credit card, overdraft also included. Yes, all of that is transaction in money. Agent includes that agent which supply the goods on his own name. If he supplies on his own name, then he is not an agent of the principal. He is himself is a principal. Agent will become an agent when he's acting on some other's behalf. If he's acting on his behalf, like there are special agents like consignment agents. So they are called as agent, but the relationship is not of a principal and agency relationship. It's a independent thing. Should we always consider the date of payment of GST on the transactions falling after the due date of payment of GST when it comes to supply of goods or services? Not clear with your question. हम ATM कार्ड से मनी ड्रॉ करते हैं तो some limit of transaction, some extra charges we pay. So that charges is supply of service, yes. But transaction is not supply, correct. So money you will withdraw even after the limit. On the money you don't pay GST. Only on the charges what the banker levies, on that we pay GST. In Goa, casino business taking place in water. So we have discussed no in the place of supply, saying that any transaction taking place in a water, okay, in the within the limits of India, the closest vicinity of the state, that state will levy GST on that. Yeah. Now let's get into, after understanding the various definitions, get into the time of supply. Time of supply of goods. The liability to pay tax on goods shall arise at the time of supply. Okay, simple. Liability to pay tax shall arise. When it shall arise, it shall arise at the time of supply. And time of supply shall be the earliest of the following: on the date of issue of invoice or the last date on which invoice is to be issued. That is section 30, issued under section 31. Section 31 says by when you should issue the invoice. So if you have issued within that time, or you have actually issued the invoice. So if I have delivered the goods and I have not issued the invoice, so I cannot say that the time of supply is when I issue the invoice. That's why they've used both the clauses. The date of actual issue of invoice or the last day on which invoice is to be issued, that becomes the time of supply or the date of receipt of payment. This is what section 12 says. That is either issue of invoice or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Now, on this note, we'll come later. So this is the first point. When is the time of supply of goods? Issue of invoice or the last day when I have to issue the invoice or the receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So what I'm trying to say here through a pictorial representation, if I say time of supply of goods is date of issue of invoice or receipt of payment. And receipt of payment means payment in the books of accounts or payment credited to my bank. That is also defined. Now, important aspect is there is a notification after the definition is defined in the GST law. They came up with the definition on 15th November 2017. When did GST come into place? On 1st of July 2017. And the notification came on 15th November saying taxpayers under forward charge are not required to pay GST at the time of receipt of advance in relation to supply of goods. Okay, so when I'm supplying something, I'm a seller, I will pay under forward charge. So under forward charge transactions of goods, I don't have to pay GST on receipt of payment. Even though the section says so, section 12 has both the clauses even now. But because of this exemption through this notification number 66, we are not paying GST on receipt of advance. We are paying GST on raising invoice itself. Okay, so for supply of goods, GST is payable on the first clause, which is that first clause which we have discussed, the date of issue of invoice or the last date when invoice is to be issued. The date of invoice or the last day on which invoice is to be raised. That is the time of supply for goods. Now this note, which says that if the supplier receives up to rupees 1,000 in excess of the amount indicated in tax invoice, time of supply, which is optional by the buyer, shall be the date of issue of invoice in respect of said excess amount. Matlab, if I've supplied 5,000 rupees worth of goods and the recipient has paid 5,700, to the extent of 700, time of supply can be the actual supply or receipt, whichever is earlier. But that will not be relevant now because of this notification number 66, which says that for supply of goods, it is always when you raise an invoice. So the relevant of this 1,000 is not relevant in goods. When we discuss service, I will explain you the relevance of that. So clear with time of supply? So the time of supply of goods is date of issue of invoice or the receipt of payment. And the date of issue of invoice is either on the actual date of invoice or the time when you are supposed to raise an invoice. When are you supposed to raise an invoice is coming from section 31. So section 12 has a close coincidence with the section 31 because time of supply says you have to raise, time of supply is when you have to raise an invoice or when you have actually raised the invoice. Now, when should you raise the invoice is coming from section 31. 31 says where the supply involves movement of goods. We know no, that supply could be supply in the place of supply. We also read that there are four kinds of transaction. One of it is where the supply involves movement of goods, and other is the case where it is delivered at the site. Second is when it is installed at the site. So all of those transactions are getting repeated here so that for each kind of transactions, time of supply can be determined. Where the supply involves movement of goods, you have to issue the invoice before removal of goods. This is section 31 reference, which says that where the supply involves movement of goods, the time of raising an invoice is before removal of goods. And where the supply does not involve movement of goods, where the goods are already there, or any other transaction where you don't involve movement of goods are already there, and you are only apportioning it to your customer. Then delivery of goods and making those goods available. There is a cement plant at the developer's site itself. Now, developer, when he wants, he will, all the cement is getting concrete, I would say, not cement, a concrete mix is there. Concrete mix is there at the plant, at the site of the customer. I'm all putting it over there. When the goods are site, the concrete mix is made available, that becomes the time of issue of invoice. So I have to issue the invoice before the delivery or making the goods available. Okay, so simple, where the goods are movable goods or where the supply involves movement of goods. All movable goods only will be there, but where the supply involves movement of goods, then I have to deliver the goods to my customer. I have to issue the invoice before removal of those goods. And when in case of non-movement of goods, at the time of delivery of the goods are making those goods available. Again, the exception here is same, that 1,000 rupees, and supply is deemed to have been made to the extent of invoice or value of payment, which means what? In case of advance that will come, again here no advance, so we'll again understand this in services. Now, in case of removal of goods, when I have, say an example that I have delivered the goods today, okay? Now, if I have not raised the invoice, and I have raised the invoice not today, I've raised the invoice after 1 month. So when should I pay GST on this? Yeah, Nagaraju. So in case of agent and principal covers only goods in Schedule 1. But in case of services, it is directly supply. Yes, because in case of a services, finding a my service provided to an agent is very difficult. So that's why in services, this condition is not there. That line of 1,000 rupees, don't worry, we will actually understand it when we go for services because it is not relevant for a transaction of goods. Because for goods, receipt is not relevant. Supply issue of invoice is relevant. Notification should be right. Yeah. Important notifications like for exemptions, we have notification number 12. That is important here. For goods, notification number 66 of 2017. You have to write because when you're deciding the time of supply and saying that for goods, time of supply is the actual issue of invoice, notification number 66 of 2017 has to be mentioned. Why buyer will pay more than sometimes we pay, right? I will give you an example where there's a mobile bill. Now, mobile bill comes every month differently. Okay, 1,650, 1,750. So as a whole round off, I will pay 2,000 rupees. So there I will pay more than what is invoiced because the excess will get adjusted with the subsequent month's invoice. It's possible that sometimes payment is made more than the invoice. Other than movement with an example, now I have a goods which is there at the customer's location because I was giving this machinery on lease. Now the lease period got over and the customer is saying, I will buy it. Okay. So I say, okay, since the goods are already there, I don't have to do any movement. So this is an example of supply without movement because the goods are already there at the customer's place. Lease term got over. Now he wants to buy it. So at the time when I say, okay, you can take it, he is having the physical delivery of the goods. So before he takes the delivery, I have to raise the invoice. So GST is payable when invoice is raised. Very wrong answer because where I raise the invoice late, that doesn't mean the time of supply will go to the date of invoice. The time of supply is when I actually raise the invoice or when I'm supposed to raise the invoice. So if the supply provision, we know the time of supply is the date of issue of invoice is where the supply involves movement before removal of the goods. In my example, I've said I've removed the goods now, but raised the invoice next month. Then the time of supply is removal of the goods today itself. Even though you have raised the invoice and collected from a customer later on, since you have removed the goods today, your time of supply is the removal of goods only. Okay, and you have to pay GST considering the removal of goods as the right time of supply. Removal of goods means dispatch of goods. Yes, dispatch of goods. So time of supply of goods is जब मैं गुड सप्लाई करता हूँ टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई कब आएगा either इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस और रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट अभी रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट रेलेवेंट नहीं है हमारे क्वेश्चन में क्योंकि 66 2017 का नोटिफिकेशन बताता है कि अगर गुड्स आप सप्लाई कर रहे हो तो आपको जब आप इनवॉइस रेस करते हो तभी आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई है रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट रेलेवेंट नहीं है लेकिन इश्यू इनवॉइस मतलब मेरा एक्चुअल इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस या फिर जब टाइम लिमिट कहता है उसके पहले मुझे रेस करना चाहिए। टाइम लिमिट कहता है सेक्शन 31 से कि वेयर द सप्लाई इन्वॉल्व्स मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स। जैसे मैं सप्लाई कर रहा हूँ जिसमें मूवमेंट इन्वॉल्व है गुड्स का। जैसे मैं कोई मोबाइल कुछ कंटेनर में कुछ प्रोडक्ट सेल करता हूँ, लॉरी से सेल करता हूँ, उसका मतलब मेरा सप्लाई मूवमेंट को इन्वॉल्व करता है। इस सप्लाई के लिए मूवमेंट जरूरी है। जब ये मूवमेंट से सप्लाई के लिए मूवमेंट जरूरी है, इट मीन्स सप्लाई इन्वॉल्व मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स, ये सप्लाई के लिए मूवमेंट जरूरी है, तब टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई हो जाएगा रिमूवल ऑफ गुड्स। जब मैं गुड्स को मेरे फैक्ट्री से निकालता हूँ वो हो जाएगा लास्ट डेट ऑफ इशू ऑफ इनवॉइस। अगर इसके पहले मैं इनवॉइस रेज करता हूँ तो अच्छी बात है, वो इनवॉइस का डेट टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई हो जाएगा। अगर मैं या फिर मैं रिमूव करता हूँ तब रेज करता हूँ तब सही बात है। अगर मैं रिमूव करने के बाद इनवॉइस रेज करता हूँ तो फिर मेरा इनवॉइसिंग जो है वो डिलेड हो गया। अब डिले कीजिए, लेकिन आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई रिमूवल ऑफ गुड्स ही रहेगा। इधर व्हेन यू हैव अ मूवेबल गुड्स आपका रिमूव करने के पहले रेस करना है। अगर आपने बाद में रेस किया तो फिर आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई रिमूवल ऑफ गुड्स ही रह जाएगा। और अदर देन मूवमेंट, जैसे मैंने एग्जांपल बताया था कि गुड्स ऑलरेडी कस्टमर के प्लेस पे है, अब वो मैं उसे सेल कर रहा हूँ, तब तो जब मैं उसको गुड्स डिलीवर करता हूँ उसके पहले मुझे इनवॉइस रेज करना चाहिए। हमेशा इनवॉइस ही टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई नहीं होता है। इनवॉइस के पहले अगर मैंने डिलीवरी कर दिया है क्या, वो चेक करना पड़ेगा। मैंने दोनों सेम टाइम पे किया है तो टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई वो हो जाएगा। अगर मैं इनवॉइस लेट रेज करता हूँ तो टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई डिलीवरी के दिन चला जाएगा। दैट इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई। Second point, Vaishali, is not relevant for us. We will take that point when supply of services comes, then we will understand this. When we move to goods for job work, वो भी एक transaction है that we'll understand, क्योंकि as soon as you move your goods for job work, that doesn't become a time of supply because job worker will do some job work and sell it back to you, so that doesn't become the time of supply. Give me 1 minute. Sorry again. Bhavika example is the rule of goods is on 4th March 23 and invoice is issued on 5th April 2023. So we have to pay GST on 20th April. Then invoice issued does not matter. Correct. So we have to pay GST on 20th April, not on the 20th May. Because if you see the actual invoice you have raised on 5th April, if you consider 5th April as the time of supply, then you will pay GST on the next month, which is May. Right? So you should not consider time of supply, not consider the date of issue of invoice. You should consider the date of dispatch because you have delayed raising the invoice. You have to go with the removal of goods. Clear with the concept of time of supply of goods? मुद्दा हिंदी में भी समझा दिया हूँ। और क्या क्वेश्चंस है आपके? बिकॉज एक और रिक्वेस्ट आया था कि हिंदी में समझा दीजिए, तो मैंने हिंदी में ठीक तरह से समझा दिया है। क्या आपका स्पेसिफिक क्वेरी? So for advance payment on goods, it's not a subject to GST, but where in case of change in rate of goods, for example, when we raised invoice at 18%, but tax decreases to 12%, now I have 16% advance amount. Is it a supply? Still not a supply, because once you have received the advance and you have raised the invoice, time of supply will go back to the date of invoice itself. So even in case of rate change, when you supplied what was the rate, that will be relevant. And the excess amount sitting is an advance. On that also, you don't have to pay GST. Forfeiture of earnest money by the seller in case of breach of agreement to sell on immovable property to buyer or such forfeit by government. The successful bidder fails to payment or allotment of natural resources is mere a flow of money. Can you explain in Hindi this and what? You just restrict this to the topics, because if you're going away from the topic, then this main thing we will lose. Vaishali, please ask your question at the end of the session if it is not related to time of supply. Invoice issued or removal of goods, whichever is earlier. Yeah, you could say that. Even if the receiver doesn't pay, no. Even if the question is, even if the receiver doesn't pay, he will get GST, ITC, no. This is from the point of supplier. Supplier has to pay. But the recipient point of view, recipient will claim it only once he pays. So the rules for supplier are different and the rules for recipient is different. You didn't understand what is supply. Okay. Supply means supply of goods. Supply of goods जो supply definition 7 में पढ़ा है वो है. Once we understand that, then all this will flow. Supply क्या है आपको section 7 पढ़ना पड़ेगा. फिर यहाँ पे आइए, then this will be clear. Next, in case of a continuous supply. So normal supply we understood. Now there is something called as a continuous supply, जो define होता है. Continuous supply of goods means the supply of goods which is provided or agreed to be provided continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract, whether or not by means of a wire, cable, pipeline, or conduit, and for which the supplier invoices the recipient on a regular or periodic basis, and includes supply of any goods as the government may subject to such conditions as it may by notification specify. So basically, what is continuous supply means a supply of goods which is supplied continuously, okay, continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract wherein you're supplying. So supply, we know that one-time supply gets over. The time of supply is very easy. But there are special situations of continuous supply wherein you could be supplying continuously. Okay. Now, how could you supply it continuously? Through a wire, wherein the electricity is also goods. So electricity you're supplying through a wire and you are raising a periodic invoice, or through a cable, you're supplying internet through a cable. Okay. आपके घर पे जो पुराने cables चैनल रहते थे वो केबल के थ्रू आते थे. Or a pipeline, okay, wherein petroleum or other kinds of fuels are being supplied through a pipeline or any conduit or any other mode. And the supplier invoices recipient on a regular and periodic basis. So periodic basis monthly हो सकता है, quarterly हो सकता है, anything. That is called as a continuous supply. And similarly, continuous supply of services है, जब वो services है तब deal करेंगे. So what is the time for issue of time of supply for a continuous supply is in case of a continuous supply of goods where successive statement of accounts or successive payments are involved. The invoice shall be issued before or at the time each such supply is issued, or as the case may be, each such payment is received. Okay? We know that in case of a continuous supply, there should be continuous supply of goods. Invoice should be raised periodically. So when such invoice is periodically raised, the invoice shall be issued before or at the time each such statement is issued. Yeah, monthly, you say in the agreement that monthly statement will be issued or a quarterly statement is issued. Once such statement is issued, before that you have to raise an invoice, or along with that statement itself, you could raise an invoice. Or when you say that there is no statement, but you have to make a regular fixed payment on a monthly basis. Then Once such payment is received, before that you have to raise a invoice. So continuous supply means, say they have a question of pipeline. So through pipeline, you are supplying fuel. Now, Indian Oil has a tank. Now it supplies through the pipeline petrol to the uh, kind of a airline company. Now, airline company, as in when it requires, it will refill it. There will not be meter reading every time. So once it refills it, and based on how much usage has happened through the pump for that uh, aeroplane, then whatever it is used for that, I will raise a statement saying that from 1st to 15th, you have used this much. When I give the statement, that time itself, I have to raise an invoice. So continuous supply means there is no single supply. It is a series of supply which is happening, called as continuous supply. Dish, gas supply, electricity supply, all of that. Yeah, even case of gas supply, directly pipelines are getting connected. So as and when my consumption happens, monthly I'll get a statement. So all of those are examples of continuous supply. When the statement is issued, invoice should be raised before that, or when a fixed payment is made, before payment, invoice should be issued. Now, next kind of supply is time, or where the supply. Yep. Where the goods are being sent or taken on approval or sale or return basis. तो इसके लिए एक एग्जांपल समझते हैं कि जो मेरे प्यारे भाई लोग हैं, they have a friend to whom they want to issue a gift. Now you know that other side, being a female, she may not like the gift. So this our smart chap wants to buy some goods and tell the shopkeeper that, boss, I will buy this, but I don't know if she will like the gift. So I will buy it now. I will take the goods. Once she's okay with it, then I will buy it from you. Till then, I am only taking the goods. So this is an example of, say, goods taken on approval for sale or return basis. I'm taking the goods to return it or to buy it. So when the supplier sends it, from his perspective, it is goods sent for approval for sale or return basis. He is sending it for sale or returning basis. So our boy gets the goods on sale or return basis. Now he gives it to his friends. His friends use it. Did you like it? First month, no, I've not yet worn it. Second month, no, I've not worn it. Third month, no, I've not worn it. So the seller calls, have you decided to buy? No, no, give me some more time. I will decide. So the seller also knows that, that yes, he will buy it for sure, but he's delaying it. So this person will also keep quiet. Now, GST will not keep quiet. Might be they are very lucky enough that the shopkeeper will keep quiet, but the GST is saying, okay, I know that you have bought it on sale or approval basis, but confirm whether you will buy or no within 6 months. If you don't confirm within 6 months, seller, you have to pay me GST. So within 6 months, if the buyer confirms, then fine. Otherwise, at the end of 6 months, you have to pay GST. That's why the invoice shall be issued. The time of supply for invoice says you should raise an invoice before or at the time of supply. That is when he confirms, say he somehow made his friend convince, and at the end of 5th month, she says okay. Then at the end of 5th month, that is time of supply. Then on the 5th month, you have to raise an invoice. Or if she confirms at the 8th month, GST is not going to wait so long. At the end of 6th month, you have to raise an invoice. From the date of removal means from the date I gave it to you, I will count 6 months time. At the end of 6 months, I will raise an invoice. Now you pay me GST. Now you keep deciding. Okay. So the time of supply for approval for sale or return basis is when the goods are removed. Before issue takes place, the invoice has to be issued before or at the time of supply, or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier. Okay. टाइम ऑफ इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस इन केस ऑफ कंटिन्यूस सप्लाई हमने देखा है कि जब कुछ सप्लाई कंटिन्यूसली पाइपलाइन से हो रहा है, ठीक है, तब जब ये पीरियोडिक स्टेटमेंट या पीरियोडिक इनवॉइस आता है, जैसे मैंने फिक्स्ड अमाउंट सप्लाई के लिए कह दिया है, दैट फिक्स्ड अमाउंट आपको महीने महीने देने हैं, तो ये इनवॉइस, ये पेमेंट आने से पहले आपको इनवॉइस रेज करना है। या फिर अगर एक पाइपलाइन है, जैसे एग्जांपल एरोप्लेन का कहा था कि फ्यूल यूज कर रहे हो, तब जब कोई भी वो स्टेटमेंट भेजते हैं, ऑयल कंपनी 20 दिन में एक इनवॉइस, एक स्टेटमेंट बना के देती है कि इतना कंजम्पशन है। जब वो स्टेटमेंट देती है उसी वक्त उसको इनवॉइस भी रेज करना चाहिए। ये कहता है कंटिन्यूस सप्लाई। What was lacking in supply chapter? The time of supply was lacking because there's no clarity when to pay the tax. There's so many components. That's why this topic clears it. Dish TV supply is goods or services. Dish TV supply is actually service itself. How can we define amount of supply? Through the contract, how the quantity is measured. Okay. So if it is supply of goods, quantity is measured. If in case of services, quantity cannot be measured. So the fixed rate, which is fixed between the supplier and receiver, that will be the value. In case of compulsory supply, contract is necessary. Contract is compulsory, but contract need not be written contract. It can be oral contract also to an kind of agreement saying that I will charge you fixed charges of 999 rupees per month. When the customer agrees, he's taking a connection. It means that he is agreeing to the thing, even though there is no physical actual contract. Just he signs that, yes, I want to subscribe to this plan. That also is an agreement. Agreement doesn't mean it should be a proper agreement. Oral agreements are these actions through which the customer confirms to get charged. That is also an agreement. So if you buy something and return, Rahul, your question, I bought something and I've returned it. So there it was not on approval or return basis, that was outrightly sale. But now, because of Amazon's policies, they're giving you a right saying that if you don't like the product, you can return it. So that is not a sale on approval basis, it is a sale and it is return of the product. So there are two transactions. So on sale, uh, ideally, they will raise a sale invoice. On return, they will raise a credit note. So it is not a transaction of sale on return basis because once they've sold it, they've delivered, they've raised an invoice. It is not on an approval basis. It is a actual sale itself. Time of issue of invoice and purchase of motor vehicle. It is the in case of EMI, it is a supply which is taking place and there is a credit which has been given. So once a motor vehicle is sold, that time itself they will raise an invoice, and this EMI is a credit facility which you are getting. So it's a separate two transaction. One is supply and one is a transaction of a leasing. Gas or electricity or internal supply is also services. Yes, all of those are services. And labor is transferred for increasing the manpower from particular head office to its branch without consideration is the supply. Yeah, if the provides one of the manpower to the branch, then any transaction between these head office and branch is also a supply. It's a supply of services, then they will have to charge a transaction value and they have to charge GST on this, even though if it is between head office and branch office. Tell me example of continuous supply except petrol and electricity. Supply, continuous supply of goods. It could be cement plant. When I have a cement plant and I am supplying continuously, saying that when the construction happens, I've been not very far, but at a close proximity to a builder, right? And I have a unit different, not in the same example what I gave before. I have a different unit. Now he will need once in a day or once in a month or twice a month. But for convenience purposes, I have a pipeline. So in that case, to the extent of the usage, I will supply it. And the reading will be the meter reading through which I will get to know how much the customer is used. That is another example of continuous supply. Continuous supply can be wire, tube, pipelines, or any other conduit. It could be anything else also wherein a continuous supply is established. An invoice is generated for pre-ordered goods and supply is not made. How GST is charged? I didn't understand your question, Mr. V. Can you please clarify this? Renting, can you please clear your question clearly? Renting immovable property continuously, same person. Is this continuous supply? Yeah, that's also a continuous supply of service, wherein I am continuously supplying the service of usage of the rent because the agreement says that every month I will charge a rent amount. So that is also example of continuous supply of service. Now we'll get into the time of supply of goods under reverse charge. Before that, let's take a break of 5 minutes. Since this is a very light topic, let's take a break from now it's 7:28. Let's assemble again at 7:35. So in case an invoice is generated for pre-ordered goods and supply is not made, how GST is charged? So if an invoice is generated, GST will be payable. That is first aspect. And if the goods are not delivered, then they will have to raise a credit note for the non-delivered goods. Renting immobile property to same person, is it continuous supply? Yes, it is a continuous supply. Example of continuous supply, milk supplied by uncle. No, that is not, because it is individual supply, which is supplied over a period of recurring time. So each day's supply is a separate supply, because once he supplies over, the transaction gets completed. Next day when milk is supplied, that day's supply is over. So milk supply will not fit into the example of continuous supply. So your example of your transaction, it will not be considered that pre-ordered, but if it is not, then they have to raise a credit note for that. Now, in case of time of supply under reverse charge, the time of supply under reverse charge is the earliest of the following: date of receipt of the goods, or the date immediately following 30 days from the date of issue of invoice. So if there is some supply of goods on which reverse charge is payable, then what is the time of supply for reverse charge? Like how we have said, supply of goods, the time of payment is not relevant, but for reverse charge, that's not true. There, the exception says is the relief of not paying GST is at the time of receipt is only when tax is payable under forward charge. So reverse charge they have not excluded. So for reverse charge, the date of receipt of the goods or the date immediately following 30 days from the date of issue of invoice or the date of payment. So whichever of these three is earlier, that is the time of supply for reverse charge. The date of receipt of the goods or immediately following 30 days from the date of issue of invoice from the supplier or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Okay, receipt 30 days from invoice or payment, whichever is earlier. If it is not possible to determine any of these three, say in reverse charge, you're not getting an invoice or things like that, then the time of supply is date of entry in the books of accounts. So recipient cannot escape saying that any of these is left out. So it's just anticipated a situation saying that when you're not able to determine in any of these three situations, your books, the entry of your books will be there. So when you enter it in your books of accounts, that will be the time of supply. So the important point to be noted is under reverse charge, the date of invoice is not the time of supply. So in case of supply under forward charge, date of invoice, but in reverse charge, the earliest of these three events will be the time of supply. Time of supply of vouchers, which is exchangeable for goods, where a voucher is issued and it is can be exchanged for goods. Then if it could be that it's a general voucher or it could be a specific voucher. So if I give you a voucher for buying a shirt, then today I know when I'm giving you a voucher is basically that you pay 1,000 rupees for this and you can use this for yourself or you could give it to any of your friends. You would gift it to anybody. That person can come and give me the voucher. I will give him the goods. Now this could be a simple voucher that I'm giving this a specific voucher that you can buy only a shirt. Then I know on the date of issue of voucher that the supply is identifiable, that whenever the person holding the voucher comes, I have to supply shirt only. Now, other case could be when I'm giving you a voucher and he can purchase anything like a shopper stop voucher or a lifestyle voucher. You can buy anything. You can buy a watch, you can buy a watch, or you can buy a garment, or you can buy a home utensil. So there, I don't know what you will buy because the rate for each of these products is different. So if the supply, as on the date of issue of voucher, if the supply is not identifiable, then the time of supply is on the redemption. So till then, this will be an advance only. So where the supply is identifiable, date of issue of voucher. If the supply is not identifiable, date of redemption of the voucher. And But then we saw that a residuary clause. So this is the residuary clause under for supply of goods. If it is not possible to determine the time of supply under 2, 3, or 4, then time of supply will be if periodical return has to be filed. You cannot say that I don't know the time of supply because it's not falling in any of these clauses. For you, where you cannot, generally you should be able to, but just in a case where the supplier is not able to identify, there it says where the periodical return has to be filed, then the date of this return filed, and in all other cases, the date on which tax is paid. Okay, these two will cover the residuary clause when that is when you're filing a return, then the date of return. In case where he's an unregistered person and he is not registered, he cannot say that I don't know the time of supply because I don't have a return filing. Then the date on which the tax is paid, right, on your supply, when the tax is paid, that becomes the time of supply. Any questions on this? Okay, if I've made payment for a product which is not yet launched, pre-launch, okay, and I've booked it. So you know that it is a kind of a voucher itself because you are paying it and you will get something in return. And you're sure that this voucher can be used only for this. Like Apple phones get launched. On pre-launch, you have to pay some amount. So you can make the payment what you have made to buy a iPhone itself. And the iPhone, the rate is known, right? So the time when you uh, make payment of this voucher, that becomes the time of supply. How can be there is supply when the only labor is transferring without consideration while it is specifically excluded in Schedule 3. By way of circular for repair and maintenance, is the labor excluded in repair maintenance only? Uh, can you just set the context? Not very clear on your question. So the time of supply for goods we have covered. Now we will understand again the time of supply for voucher for clarity. Where the supply is identifiable, date of issue of voucher. Where the supply is not identifiable, then the date of redemption of voucher. Clear. As on the date of issue of voucher, do you know what will be the rate of tax and what will be the product? Yes. Then date of issue of voucher. If it is not identifiable, then the date of redemption of voucher. And residuary clause says where it is not possible to determine the time of supply of goods as per the above provision, then if a periodical return is filed, then such date on which return is filed, that is the time of supply. And in other cases, date on which the tax is paid. Okay, the date on which return is required to be filed, or in other cases when the GST is paid. Now, in case of goods, you can see in valuation that there are other cases where section 12 subsection 6 says that where the time, what is the time of supply in case of addition in value. Now, addition value could be in case of the following instances where you are due to delay in payment. You have made a supply. Now, because you had a clause that if you delay the payment, then you have to pay IPL. IPL could be is a short form for either you have to pay me interest or you have to pay me penalty or late fees. If any of these is there that you have to pay penalty or late fees, then if there is a delay in payment, then the time of supply is on receipt basis, which means that if there is a delay and I collect some charges for that, okay, that will not be separately taxed at a separate rate because this is linked to the main supply. So if I've supplied, say, steel rods, and I say that I'm supplying it to you and you have to make the payment within 30 days. If you don't pay within 30 days, I will levy a late fees. So for this late fees, the same product, the steel rods itself, the value of that will be applicable on this late fees because of the concept of composite supply. Since the supply of this late fees is basis the supply of the steel rods, whatever is the rate for the steel rods will apply for this late fees also. And if I make the late fees, because today on the date of supply, I don't know whether you will make the payment late or on time. So today I will not levy the late fees. I will levy the late fees after the time period of 30 days is completed. So when I raise a debit note for that and you make a payment to me after 30 days, the time of supply for such late fees, interest, or penalty will be the date of payment. That is on actual receipt basis, not on issue of the invoice or debit note. So only for interest, penalty, and late fees, the time of supply is on receipt basis. Now, if there's any other default, then you have to see whether it is linked to the original supply or is it a supply itself. Okay, like I raise a debit note, I made a supply. Now, at the time of supply, you said that you will do the installation. But after I supply, you have said, no, no, you have to do the installation. So I will renegotiate my price and say that I will charge separately for the installation. Earlier, you said you will do it. Now I will raise a installation charges. Then is it linked to the original supply? Yes. Then GST is based on the debit note. So when I raise a debit note, that becomes my time of supply. Now, if there's any other supply which is not linked to the supply, then you have to determine whether it's a supply itself or not. Okay, anything linked to the supply, like in my case, installation, it is linked, then the date of this debit note will become the time of supply. Clear on supply of goods? So is the voucher applied on value of the product or after including tax? So vouchers will be inclusive of tax, right? Because that is the net transaction. That's the net transaction value, not the gross value. So vouchers will be inclusive of tax. Date on which tax is paid. So if a unregistered persons make a supply of a transaction of 50 lakhs, so can we say that GST is not payable? GST is still payable because he's crossed the threshold limit, but he's not taken registration. So once he takes the registration or not, registration only gives him other benefits, but the liability to pay tax is still appearing. Okay. So supply of a transaction by an unregistered person, the time of supply will be the still the payment of tax. In mall, we get gift voucher that we get on next purchase. In that case, time of supply, again, these vouchers are not monetary vouchers. So these are discount coupons, right? That you when you buy next time any purchases, you'll get 10% discount. So those are discounts. Those are not vouchers. When we are talking about vouchers, we are talking of vouchers which has a cash value, like gift cards when you buy. You have to pay 500 rupees and get that gift card. Those are those vouchers which we are talking about, not the gift discount coupons. So I asked the question before break that is there a supply when labor is transferred without consideration for increasing manpower from head office to its brancher? Yes, there is a supply. How can there be a supply when the only labor is the labor excluded and repairs only? Yes, only for specific transaction it is excluded, but in all other transactions, when I supply from my head office to branch, it is a supply. So when there is a case wherein even if I don't supply and the head office is providing some services to the branch office, still it is a supply because branch office will use the management services of the head office decision making. In that case, also you are giving a case of supply of labor, but a case of non-supply of labor also is liable for supply transaction. Other default could be in case of any other default, right? If I, other than interest, penalty, and late fees, I levy some other charges, then is the transaction of any other default. Special charges again. So any special charges which I levy and I charge any late payment charges in terms of interest, penalty, or late fees, then the time of supply is not date of issue of invoice. The time of supply is on actual receipt of those charges. So you say voucher is inclusive of tax, but seller don't know which goods the buyer will buy. Okay, if he doesn't know, then at the time of redemption. But if he knows, then it is at the time of issue of this voucher itself. So that's why the time of supply of voucher in case of non-identifiable goods is on redemption of the voucher. When they will redeem it, that time they will reduce it. Okay. Now let's move to time of supply of services, like how we decided for goods, similarly for services. But in services, there are little different conditions. Time of supply of services says that if the invoice is issued within 30 days or 40 days, 40 days, 45, two times you have said, because 30 days you have to, when you make a supply of service, you have to issue the invoice on a timely basis. For goods, we know it is on movement of goods. So once it is dispatched, for services, we cannot say dispatch because services is intangible. We cannot identify the dispatch. So once you have completed the service, they're saying that, okay, you may miss it. So we are giving you 30 days time to raise an invoice. Once you complete the service, raise the invoice within 30 days. And 45 days for whom? For a banking company, insurance company, or a financial institution company. So for these three type of organization, insurance company, banking companies, and financial institution, extra 15 days is given. Okay. But for other service provider, only 30 days time is given. So raise an invoice from the completion of service within 30 days. So if we have raised an invoice within 30 days, then the time of supply is issue of invoice or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Okay. Because in services, that exclusion or that exemption of 66 is not there. So if I get the amount in advance, then they have to pay GST on the advance itself or issue of invoice, whichever is earlier. In case I delay my invoice, the government is giving a time of 30 days and 45 days in case of a banking company, insurance, and financial institution. So if I don't issue the invoice on a timely basis, then the time of supply will be the payment or provision of the service. They're giving you 30 days. If you within 30 days, if you don't raise within 30 days, then the provision of service will be made. That becomes the time of supply. Clear? So if you raise it on time, the date of invoice. If you don't raise it on time, you will go back to the date of provision of service. Take an example. On 30th June, I provided the service. Okay. Now, if I raise an invoice within 30 days, that is within 30th July, if I raise an invoice and say advance has not come. After I raise the invoice, the customer will make the payment. If I've raised the invoice on 30th July and the payment has come on August, time of supply is 30th July. Okay. Now take an instance, same supply of 30th June. I should raise the invoice by 30th July, but I've raised it on 1st of August, 1 day delay, which is beyond 30 days. The time of supply will not be 30th July. That is the due date for payment of invoice, of due date for raising an invoice. Like how for good we have that the date you should raise an invoice. If you have not raised, that date becomes the date of time of supply. In case of services, 30th June, you have completed this. By 30th July, you should raise the invoice. You have raised it by 1 day delay. Time of supply will go back to the date of provision of service. It will go back to 30th June. So if you have not raised the invoice, the time of supply goes there. You have to pay the interest for the delayed payment of taxes. Understand? The importance of raising the invoice on a timely basis is if you don't raise the invoice on a timely basis, the time of supply falls back to the provision of service and not the due date of raising the invoice. Okay. So if you don't raise the invoice on time, the time of supply falls back to the date of provision of service. Now, what is receipt of payment? Receipt of payment is defined as payment in the books of account. Okay, in your books of account when you have received the payment, or payment is credited in the bank, whichever is relevant. Okay. Now, what is debit note or credit note? We'll come back to that. But say for your understanding, when I've raised the invoice, now I have missed out some amount to be raised. So I had to raise 1,100, but I've raised 1,000 in the invoice. For the differential 100, I don't have to raise the invoice again because invoice is already raised. For this increase in price, I will raise a debit note. So for a decrease in price, so I had to raise 990, but I've raised 1,000. For this differential of 10 rupees, I will raise a credit note. Debit note is for increase in value. Credit note is for decrease in value. Can there be supplied between two unregistered person? Yes, there can be, no restriction. What about the date of payment? of tax in voucher or other cases, who will pay the tax in that case? The supplier will pay, because I've given a voucher for 1,000, which is identifiable at that point of time. So I know what is the rate of tax. On that, I will pay the GST to the government. Where it is not identifiable, I will pay the taxes when the voucher is redeemed. So the voucher includes the tax itself. Provision of service means services provided. Yeah, true. How to issue an invoice? Is there any portal for that? So there is something called as a e-invoicing. So e-invoice happens wherein you have to issue the invoice through portal. That is only for a turnover having people who are having turnover more than 50 crores. But people who are having more than 5 crores, but people who are having turnover less than 5 crores, they should issue a normal invoice. That will come when we discuss on invoicing. But for now, understand that invoice means issuance of invoice. So it could be normal invoice or e-invoice, whichever is relevant. Okay. So we understood receipt of payment and time of supply of services. Next, here also you have this exception. Now this exception will reason. So because of receipt of goods, we said the same thing is there. Now we'll understand what happens in case of receipt of an amount up to rupees 1,000 in excess. Now I have supplied a service of mobile phones or for mobile postpaid connection. It's a supply of service. I have raised an invoice for 940 rupees. Now the customer didn't want to pay part amount and he said, okay, take a round of amount. So he's paid 1,000 rupees. So excess of 60 rupees is the advance for me. Now I have to pay the GST on receipt of advance or issue of invoice, whichever is earlier. For the 60 rupees, I will adjust with next month, which is the invoice date. But 60 is an advance for me. And time of supply for services is receipt of advance, whichever is earlier. Since I've received advance of 60 rupees, should I pay GST on that? That's where this exception is coming, saying that if there is an excess amount of 1,000 rupees, so in this case it's 60, you don't have to pay GST on that for such excess up to amount of rupees 1,000 rupees. Okay, up to 1,000 rupees in excess, you don't have to pay taxes on advance. You can pay it when you raise an invoice. If the excess is 2,000 rupees or 1,500 rupees, then you have to pay in GST at the time of advance itself. Receipt of an amount up to rupees 1,000 in excess, the time of supply falls back to the date of invoice. I said that this is not relevant for goods. Same condition is there because they anyways on advance we are not paying GST, right? So that's why that becomes irrelevant there. Second exception is supply is deemed to be have made to the extent of invoice or value of payment. Okay, so if I raised a invoice, if I have received an advance of 1,000 rupees, but the value of the goods is 10,000 rupees. So I said that payment on 1,000 has to be made. So you will make payment of GST on 1,000 because of this clause, because supply is deemed to have been made to the extent of invoice or value of payment. So if you're paid 1,000, up to 1,000, it will be deemed that the value, this is the value of supply. And once the 10,000 comes, on 10,000, the value is 10,000, but to the extent of 1,000, which is paid, you will reduce and supply will be to the extent of 9,000. Because you have paid GST on 1,000, you don't have to pay double taxes on that. So you'll pay GST, you'll calculate GST on 10,000 less advance received. So you'll adjust it from the invoice. डेबिट नोट परचेज रिटर्न के लिए नहीं होता है. परचेज रिटर्न, सेल रिटर्न जो हमारा अकाउंटिंग टर्मिनोलॉजी वो डिफरेंट है. जीएसटी में डेबिट नोट क्रेडिट नोट अलग है. जीएसटी डेबिट नोट स्पेसिफिकली बोलता है जब आपका वैल्यू इंक्रीज होता है ओरिजिनल इनवॉइस से तब आपको डेबिट नोट रेस करना है, और जब आपका वैल्यू घटता है तब क्रेडिट नोट रेस करना है. ये जीएसटी का डेबिट नोट क्रेडिट है जो हम अकाउंटिंग में समझते हैं. वो सेम टर्मिनोलॉजी यूज किया है लेकिन वो अलग है और ये अलग है. वो डेबिट नोट जब परचेज रिटर्न करते हैं डेबिट नोट, फिर सामने वाला क्रेडिट नोट देना चाहिए यहाँ. लेकिन जीएसटी में जब हम सप्लाई करते हैं तब इनवॉइस रेस करते हैं, और जब सप्लाई वैल्यू घट गया है और हमको करेक्ट वैल्यू रेस करना है, लेकिन मतलब मैंने इनवॉइस कम का रेस किया है, तब वैल्यू इंक्रीज करने के लिए मैं डेबिट नोट रेस करता हूँ और वैल्यू घटाने के लिए मैं क्रेडिट नोट रेस करता हूँ. If audit fees is payable for 23-24 by a company, now what is the time of supply of service for issue of invoice by CA firm? So once the audit it's getting completed, because financial year is completed in 23-24, but once I raise an invoice, when will I raise an invoice? When I finish the audit. So the finishing of audit is the time of supply. Okay, I have to raise the invoice within 30 days once I finish the audit. Could you please explain the case of advance and its applicability in GST? We have discussed this. So once an advance is received, so I have agreed for a price of 5,000 rupees. Now the customer, I've said that you have to pay me an advance. So he pays me 3,000 rupees. Up to 3,000 rupees, it is treated as value of supply. So I have to pay GST on 3,000 rupees. And when I raise an invoice finally for 5,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, I will reduce this 3,000, and on the balance 2,000, I will pay the GST. Explain the explanation two. Supply is deemed to have been made to the extent of invoice or value of payment. To the extent of advance what I've collected, that is deemed that to that extent I have made a supply. So if the supply transaction is for 10,000 and I've received payment of 2,000, we know that GST is to be paid on earliest of these two, right? So I don't have to pay GST on earliest. Since I've received the payment earliest, I don't have to pay GST on the whole 10,000 rupees, because the supply is deemed to the extent of value of amount received. So to the extent of 2,000 only I have to pay GST, not on the whole 10,000 at the time of receipt of advance. On the date of invoice, I have to pay GST to the extent of balance. Now, Abdul, this 30 and 45 days information is very much there in the study material. Time limit for issue of invoice for supply of service under section 31. I could see in page number, para number 6.29. Time of supply. There you will see the mention of this. Okay, let's proceed further. Time limit for issuance of invoice and insurance. An insurance, banking company, financial institution, including NBFT or telecom operator, or any class of supplier of service as may be notified by the government making taxable supply of services between distinct persons as specified in 25 may issue the invoice before or at the time of supply, recorded the same in the books of accounts, or before the expiry of the quarter during which the supply was made. So the time limit for issue of invoice is an exception itself, wherein from one banking company to another banking company, okay, within the branch's office, they can make a invoice on a quarterly basis. The time of supply normally is within 30 days, but for a banking company, NBFC, telecom operator, internally, if there is any transaction, they can raise an invoice before the expiry of the quarter during which the supply was made. Then in case of continuous supply of services, we've understood continuous supply of goods. Now, what is the continuous supply of services? Let's go back to the definition of continuous supply of services. We understood the continuous supply of goods. Now the continuous supply of services. There it is, when it is continuously supplied for goods, it is continuously supplied to wire, cable, or pipeline. In case of services, continuous supply of service means a supply of services which is provided or agreed to be provided continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract. Again, the contract could mean oral or verbal contract for a period exceeding 3 months. So in case of goods, there is no timeline, but in case of services, it is a continuous supply for more than 3 months with periodic payment obligations and include supply of such service as the government may specify. So if the government is specifying something, then it will be there. But generally, Continuous supply means the any supply wherein I'm continuously supplying for a period of 3 months. 3 months minimum, more than 3 months also possible. Minimum 3 months. So in that case, the due date time of supply will be where the due date is ascertained from the contract. The invoice shall be issued on or before the due date, where the due date is ascertainable from the contract. Where the due date is not ascertainable, the invoice shall be issued at the time when the supplier of service receives the payment. So first is the contract, second is the payment, or where the payment is linked to the completion of the invoice shall be issued on the date of completion of an event. So 3 cases where there is a fixed time limit. If the date is ascertainable, then the date of payment. If the date is not ascertainable from the contract, then when the payment is received. So generally for continuous supply, there will not be kind of a reading or something which happens, unlike for goods. Here the timeline will be fixed that monthly you have to make the payment. Like rental example, somebody had given very good example. Rental, the contract says that monthly will make the payment. So monthly payment will become the time of supply. Or if it is for some kind of an event and the event gets completed, like I'm doing a construction of building, right? And construction of building before issuance of OC, we have discussed this several times, is a supply of service. So for this completion of building, I have agreed that I will raise an invoice once I complete each floor. Okay, so each floor once I complete, I will raise an invoice. So this completion of slab wise or floor wise is that event in this case. So once that one floor is complete, I'll raise the invoice. Second floor is incomplete, I'll raise the invoice. Or it will be bundled saying that each 5 floors I will raise the invoice. So if it's agreed as such, once that event is completed, I will raise the invoice. That becomes the time of supply. Where the supply of services ceases under a contract. Okay. Now in case where the supply is getting closed, then where the contract before the completion of the supply, the invoice shall be issued. In case of seizure of services, the invoice shall be issued at the time when the supply ceases, and such invoice shall be issued to the extent of supply made before such cessation. So it's a continuous supply, and in between I've broken it. Then from the last invoice till the date of closure of the contract, whatever is the value, I have to raise the invoice. So I don't have to wait for the completion of that full term. If it is broken in between up to the date of brokerage, up to breakage, I have to charge a invoice. Then time of supply under reverse charge. Reverse charge, time of supply under reverse charge is at the earliest of the following: date of payment, same for goods, date of payment, or the date immediately following 60 days. So forward charge, you have to raise an invoice within 30 days. For reverse charge, you have to, the time of supply is immediately 60 days from the date of issue of invoice. Again, here, if it is not possible to determine A or B, then time of supply is the date of entry in the books of accounts. And in case of associate enterprises, special mention is there. Let's come back to that after understanding the time of supply. Now, let's distinguish between RCM for goods and RCM for services. So time of supply, so that we'll understand this better. For RCM for goods, it says earliest of receipt of goods, right? Or date of payment, or 30 days from the date of issue of invoice. If not, then the date of recording the supply in the books of accounts. Now for RCM for services, it is earliest of receipt of goods is not there. So this criteria is gone. And receipt of services, they have not mentioned. So that is to avoid confusion, that is also removed. In case of receipt of services, only 2 conditions: date of payment or 60 days from the date of invoice. Forward charge 30 days, reverse charge 60 days. Reverse charge for goods 30 days, and reverse charge for services 60 days. And if not recorded, from the date of recording the supply. Here RCM, receipt of date of payment or 60 days from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier. Now there was one condition over here which said that in case of related party, associate enterprises is defined when 2 enterprises are associated with each other. Okay, if it's a holding or subsidiary company, or one subsidiary to one holding 2 subsidiaries, They are all called as associate enterprises. In case of a supply between associate enterprises, they may not make the payment, right? They will adjust it at the year end to books of accounts and other things. Head office, branch office, also associated enterprise. So if there is a transaction between associated enterprises, then the supplier of service is located outside India. So if the supplier is located outside India, okay, that is supplier is outside India and receiver is India. It means it is a import of service on which we have to pay reverse charge. We have discussed this in reverse charge provisions that on import of services, the Indian company has to pay reverse charge. Now, if the supplier is outside India and receiver is in India, the time of supply will be date of entry in the books of accounts of the recipient. Then I make a provision saying that I have to make payment to my foreign associate company. The date or the date of payment, whichever is earlier, will be the time of supply. So in case of normal reverse charge, it is date of payment or 60 days from the date of invoice. But in case of an associate enterprises, the associated enterprises may not raise the invoice. In such situation, the date of entry in my books of accounts or date of payment, whichever is earlier, will become the time of supply. That is what is mentioned here. In case of an associated enterprises supplier located outside India, the date of recording of supply in the recipient's book or date of payment. Supply of services from outside India. So associate enterprises, this enterprise is outside India. He is providing some service. Say in case of a Microsoft company, Microsoft is located in US. Now Microsoft does common marketing services for all its subsidiaries across the world. India, there is one subsidiary. Now, for this advertisement services, India also takes the benefit. So when India takes the benefit, the centralized Microsoft, which paid for this advertisement, they will have to charge me. Now, when they will charge me, it can be consolidated and it could be delayed. So then that normal 60 days criteria will not apply. If I have made an entry in my book saying that I have to make payment to the Microsoft, so by internal MIS calculations, I will get to know how much I have to pay. So date of entry of service in the books of accounts, to the extent I make the entry, that will be the time of supply, or the date of payment of service, whichever is earlier, will be the time of supply. Okay. So that is all on time of supply for services. If advance is received against goods by composite dealer, should they pay GST or not? Still, they will pay GST on issue of invoice itself for a composite dealer also, because the provision says for supply of goods for on which GST is payable under forward charge, the time of supply will be on the date of invoice. Date of payment need not be considered. So for a composite dealer also, basis invoice only he will pay it. These services up to 1,000 rupees. Okay, now we have taken an example of mobile phone company. That was a practical scenario. Now let's take another scenario that I have raised an invoice for um, doing a issuance of a certificate, right? Now CAs do a lot of issuance of certificates. Now I do recurring invoicing for services, and I do recurring certificates. So every 15 months, one certificate comes. So I will raise an invoice of 3,500 rupees. Now, say the customer, while paying this 3,500 rupees, by wrongly he's paid 3,900 rupees. Okay, for whatever reasons, he's made a mistake and paid instead of 3,500, he's made a payment of 3,900. Now, what is the time of supply for this 3,500? I have raised the invoice within 30 days of provision of service. So for this 3,500, the time of supply is the date of invoice, right? 16th March, I have raised the invoice. On 30th March, he's made the payment. Payment is afterwards. The time of supply is 16th March. On the April, I will discharge the GST. Now for this 3,500, but payment is made on 3,900, 400 rupees is excess, correct? So for this 400 rupees, the time of supply is this receipt of advance. So 500, I have 400, I received excess. Should I pay GST on this ideally or no? I should pay, right? Because 1,000 is advance, because for that I have not raised an invoice, but he's paid me in advance. So 400 rupees I have to pay GST. The government is saying that up to 1,000 rupees of such excess, okay, don't pay GST on actual receipt. You can adjust this with the next invoice. So next invoice, which I will raise in April, I will adjust this 400 rupees and I will discharge the GST on that whole invoice. So I don't have to pay GST on this advance. That is what this excess 1,000 is saying. Where law is applicable to the time of supply, correct? If in the RCM both goods or service invoice is not received by the recipient and payment is also not there, but received goods or services, in that case, the receive date will be the time of supply. So if you have not received the invoice for goods, it says actual delivery of the goods. For goods, it will be actual receipt within that. So you have to make the payment, whichever is earliest, right? In RCM, we have said receipt of goods, issue of invoice by the supplier 30 days within that, or payment whichever is earlier. So for goods, issue of receipt of service. For services, you have to receipt the invoice or make the payment. For services, actual receipt of services is not the criteria. For goods, it is there. So for goods, once you receive the goods and you have not received the invoice, you have not made the payment, still reverse charge is applicable. But for services, either receipt of invoice or payment, one of this should happen. Now let's recapitulate whatever we have discussed. The provision relating to time of supply of goods is contained in 12, is summarized below. Time of supply under forward charge, date of issue of invoice, or the due date of invoice as per 31, or the date of recording of payment, whichever is earlier. But we know that this criteria is not there. Only date of issue of invoice is relevant. Section notification number 66 excludes this criteria. No GST at the time of receipt of advance for supply. GST is to be paid on date of invoice or due date of issue of invoice. Time of supply for services. Why we are still mentioning? Because it is still there in the section. Just because of notification, it is excluded. So the provision still continues. Time of supply of goods under reverse charge, date of receipt of goods or date of recording of payment or date on which payment is made, 31st days from the supplier's invoice, whichever is earlier. Receipt of goods, recording of payment, or this is both payment itself. So receipt of goods, payment, or 30 days from the supplier's invoice, whichever is less. If it is not ascertainable, date of entry in the books of accounts. In case of vouchers, date of issue of vouchers, if the supply is identifiable. If the supply is not identifiable, on the date of redemption of voucher. Then supply of services, and this, it's clear. In case of supply of service, time of supply of services under forward charge, date of issue of invoice, or the date of payment. Date of payment is divided that when you record the payment or when the payment is credited. Because sometimes you may say that I'm not recorded in the books as payment. That doesn't matter. Date in your bank statement will be there. Whichever of this is earlier will be the time of supply. In case of supply of services under forward charge where invoice is not issued, date of provision of service or date of recording, whichever is earlier. Okay. Time of supply of service under reverse charge, date of recording the payment or 60 days from the supplier's invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Then for voucher, date of issue of voucher if the supplier is identified and date of redemption. Same for goods, what is there for voucher? Similarly, Then residual cases where a periodical return is to be filed or the date of payment. And in case of addition in value, it is on actual basis. Okay. Any questions still here? Let's take up some MCQ to understand if you don't have any questions. Please provide example for delayed payment that I have agreed that I will make the payment within 15 days. And if I have not made the payment, then the supplier will charge late payment charges. Okay. Now this late payment charges is I've raised the invoice on 15th March. Okay. 15th March is the time of supply for this goods. Now agreement was 31st March, you have to make the payment. You have not made the payment on 31st March. So I will raise a debit note for late payment charges. I've paid the late payment charges on 1st of April. The time of supply will not be 1st of April. I've made the payment on 30th June. Since the invoice in normal case will be 1st April, but in this case of late payment charges, 30th June is the time of supply. That is what is the provision for late payment charges. Provision of service means when you provide the service, and the service is completely provided. That is the meaning of provision of service. डेबिट नोट क्रेडिट नोट जीएसटी हिंदी में समझा दिया। जब मैं सप्लाई कुछ करता हूं और मेरा वैल्यू कम है, अब मुझे इंक्रीज करना है, उस तब मैं डेबिट नोट ट्रेस करूंगा। एंड जब मेरे को वैल्यू घटाना है कि मेरा इनवॉइस ज्यादा था और उसका कम करना है, तब मैं क्रेडिट नोट ट्रेस करूंगा। वो है जीएसटी का डेबिट नोट और क्रेडिट। Okay, let's take the MCQs now. Mrs. Positive Advisors Private Limited provided vouchers to its employees worth 5,000 on 29th October 2021 on the occasion of its 8th anniversary, which is on 28th October. The voucher value can be used either for purchase of goods or purchase of services. Voucher can be redeemed anytime. Few of its employees redeemed the voucher on 26 June 2022. What is the time of supply of these vouchers? Is GST applicable on delayed payment? Yes, it's applicable, except interest. So in the previous class, we said no, interest is not applicable, but in other cases, it will be applicable. Srinivasan 1A, please check if your answer is correct. Sakshi, check your answer again. Rohan Kumar, 20th October. Why is it so? In case of vouchers, where it is identifiable on the date of issue of vouchers, then the date of the issue of voucher itself, else the date of redemption. So question says the voucher can be used for either purchase of goods or purchase of services, which means it is not ascertainable. Then the time of supply is the date of redemption, which is 26th June. So 26th June is the correct answer. Which of the following is time of supply in case of supply of goods where reverse charge mechanism is applicable? Reverse charge for goods. So many people are giving answers for services. Okay, we understood the question properly. What is the following is the time of supply in case of supply of goods on which reverse charge is applicable? Right. So majority have given the correct answer. In case of receipt of goods, date of receipt of the goods or date immediately following 30 days from the date of invoice. 60 days is for services. Okay. So for goods, it is 30 days. Receipt of goods or date immediately following 30 days from the date of invoice or the date of payment, whichever is earlier. Ms. Gomati provided professional services Mr. Dinesh on 29th May 2022. Invoice is issued on 28th June 22. Payment for her services received on 1st July. What is the time of supply? Means when received extra and used in the next invoice, it is credit note. No, no, there you don't give a credit note. When the value itself is wrong, then you will issue a debit note or credit note for the amount received extra. Okay, then you will not issue any document. Okay. Wow, this question is really confusing. So I'm getting mixed answers, all kinds of answers, A, B, and C. The point is when the professional services are provided, it's a service provision. It is provided on 29th May. When should the invoice be issued? It should be issued within 60 days. But invoice is issued on 28th June. So invoice is issued on time. It will not be 60 days from time. It will be when the invoice is issued on time, the date of invoice. So in this case, invoice is issued on time. So the time of supply is 28th June. Okay. And payment is received later on. That doesn't matter. It will be the date of issue of invoice. Clear? Some people are saying 29th May. It will not be 29th May, it will be 29th May if the invoice is delayed. In this case, invoice is issued on time. So it is on the 28th June itself. Which of the 30 days from the issue of invoice, not 60 days. I had said 60 days by mistakenly. 60 days is for RCM. For forward charge, this is 30 days. 29th May, within 20th June, she has to issue and she is issued on time. So 20th June is the time of supply. If she had issued on 30th May, then it will fall back to 29th. If you would have issued on 30th June, which is more than 30 days, then the time of supply will be 29th May. Which of the following is time of supply in case of supply of services where RCM is applicable? Again, a confusing question. 4C or 4D people are confused. Okay, many have given the right answer. Option C, it's not D. Date of payment or date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier. D, what is the confusion is date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice, that's fine. Or 60 days from the date of payment. It is not 60 days from the date of payment, it's just on the date of payment. So here the confusion is 60 days from the date of payment. That is incorrect. So correct answer is date of payment or date immediately following 60 days. Answer is C. Last MCQ. Mr. Karthik provided services Mr. Gautam on 12th January 2022. Invoice is issued on 15th Feb 2022 and date of payment is 22nd March 22. What is the time of supply? So when we received wrong amount, invoice means greater amount. Invoice, that's not actually says credit note and vice versa debit note. So when you have raised a wrong invoice and you issued more, then you will raise a debit note and credit. Sri Lakshmi, very good. You've given a very fastest answer and a correct answer. 5B. Why are the people saying it's 5B? Because invoice is issued on 15th February. 15th February is the date. Time of supply for services is if you raise an invoice within 30 days from the date of issue, from the date of completion of service. So the service was completed on 12th Jan, and invoice should be issued within 30 days. It should be issued within 11th Feb. But in this case, it is issued on 15th Feb. So time of supply will fall back to the date of completion of service, which is 12th Jan. So the time of supply is 12th Jan 22. Okay, answer is C and not B. So time of supply is completed. Tomorrow we'll meet for value of supply, time of supply. I hope, as I promised, it is a simple chapter. Just by going through the summary or the recap what we've done, you will be able to understand the whole chapter. Okay, any more questions? Yeah, I've uploaded the notes. I will again tell the team what best I can do. I will do. It's up to the team to do the rest, but I will still remind them again. We will count from 12 Jan to 12 Feb or 12 Jan to 11th Feb. 30 days, so 12 Jan to 11th Feb, not till the 12th Feb. For exemption chapters, like how I had done the manual thing, please do it that way so that all the exemptions can be captured at one place. Otherwise, the chapter becomes very voluminous. Okay, sample writing, we will try to do in the next class for one question. Date of provision of service कब लेंगे? जब service खत्म हो गया, तब you will take the date of provision of service. Facebook is supply of service and he pays GST under entertainment tax. There's no entertainment tax as such. They pay GST on the transaction that it is a supply of service. So advance in case of goods, it is not to be considered as payment of GST, but advance in case of services is to be considered. Yes, correct. Okay. Uh, Good night. Thank you very much.